The first bullet tore through the stagecoach wheel just as Sarah Greene was composing her resignation to spinsterhood in her mind. And she decided then that dying without ever being kissed would be the cruelest irony of all. The stage lurched sideways with a violence that sent passengers tumbling like dice in a gambler's cup, and Sarah found herself pressed against the worn leather seat, her traveling bag spilling its meager contents across the floor. She had nothing to her name but the clothes she wore, a few dollars sewn into her hem, and a letter from a distant cousin who had promised work at a boarding house in Columbus, New Mexico. The year was 1885, and Sarah had learned that promises were as substantial as morning mist. The driver was shouting something she could not make out over the thunder of hooves and gunfire. Another passenger, a merchant with nervous hands, was praying in rapid Spanish. Sarah pressed herself low as the coach careened forward, the horses screaming their terror into the desert air. Through the window she could see riders gaining on them, their faces masked with bandanas, their intentions clear in the gleam of drawn revolvers. Then the coach hit something, a rock or a rut, and the damaged wheel gave way entirely. The world spun in a chaos of dust and splintering wood. Sarah felt herself thrown, felt the impact that drove the breath from her lungs, felt the strange stillness that followed the crash. When she opened her eyes, she was lying several feet from the overturned stage, tasting blood and sand, her ears ringing like church bells. The bandits were dismounting. 3 of them, she counted, though her vision swam. The merchant was crawling away, still praying. The driver was not moving at all. Sarah tried to stand and found her legs unwilling. She managed to get to her hands and knees, her dress torn and dusty, when she heard the click of a hammer being pulled back. "Well now, what do we have here?" The voice was rough as gravel, amused in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Sarah looked up into the barrel of a gun, and beyond it, into eyes that held no mercy. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years. She thought of the father who had drunk himself into an early grave. She thought of the brother who had sold everything they owned to pay his gambling debts and left her with nothing, not even a family name worth speaking. She thought she should be more afraid than she was, but mostly she felt angry that this was how her story would end, unmourned and unremarked in the New Mexico dust. The gunshot, when it came, was not the one she expected. The bandit in front of her jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. His gun fell from suddenly nerveless fingers. The other 2 spun, shouting, raising their own weapons toward a rider approaching at full gallop. Sarah saw him through the dust like something from a fever dream, a tall man on a paint horse, a rifle in his hands and determination in the set of his shoulders. He fired twice more, the shots precise and devastating. One bandit went down clutching his leg. The other made it to his horse and fled, his wounded companion struggling to follow. The man on the paint horse let them go, his attention already turning to the overturned stage. He dismounted in a fluid motion, all lean muscle and practical grace, and Sarah found herself staring at the most striking face she had ever seen. Not handsome in a conventional sense, but strong-featured and weather-worn, with eyes the color of a winter sky and hair that fell dark beneath his hat. He could not have been much older than 27 or 28, she judged, though the sun had carved lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting at horizons. "You hurt, miss." His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that could gentle a spooked horse or command attention in a crowded saloon. He was already kneeling beside her, his hands careful as he checked for obvious injuries. "I do not think so," Sarah managed, though her ribs ached and her palms were scraped raw. "The driver, I will check on him. Can you stand?" She nodded, and he helped her to her feet with a gentleness that surprised her. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living, but his touch was careful. When she swayed, he steadied her without presumption, his manner respectful. "Easy now. You took a hard fall." He left her leaning against the overturned coach and went to check the driver. Sarah watched as he knelt beside the still form, checked for a pulse, and then slowly shook his head. The merchant had stopped praying and was sitting in the dust, rocking slightly, his eyes blank with shock. The stranger returned to Sarah, his expression grave. "Driver's gone. I am sorry. What about you, sir?" This last to the merchant, who did not seem to hear. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, though she had not known the driver beyond his gruff greeting when she had boarded that morning in Las Cruces. It seemed wrong that a man could be alive and then not, just like that, with no ceremony or significance. The stranger seemed to read something in her face because his own expression softened. "Name's Daniel Hollister," he said. "I have a ranch about 5 miles north of Columbus. I can take you there, get you cleaned up, and then bring you into town if that is where you were headed." "Sarah Greene," she replied automatically. "Yes, I was going to Columbus. I have work waiting there." She hoped she did anyway. The letter from her cousin had been brief and not overly warm. "Then we will get you there, Miss Greene, but first, let us tend to you and your fellow passenger." He looked at the merchant, who had begun to weep silently. "Sir, can you ride?" It took some coaxing, but eventually they got the merchant onto the back of Daniel's horse. Sarah found herself sitting in front of Daniel, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins, his chest solid against her back. She should have felt improper, scandalized even, but mostly she felt safe for the first time in months. He smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, and when he spoke, she could feel the rumble of his voice through his chest. "Hold on, Miss Greene. The ranch is not far." They rode through the afternoon heat, the desert stretching around them in shades of gold and rust. Sarah had never been to New Mexico before, had spent all her 22 years in Texas, until her brother's debts had forced her to seek opportunities elsewhere. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all sharp edges and long shadows. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the blazing sky. Daniel did not speak much as they rode, but his silence was comfortable rather than cold. When he did speak, it was to point out a hawk circling overhead or to warn her to duck beneath a low-hanging branch as they passed through a dry creek bed. She found herself relaxing against him despite her better judgment, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The Hollister ranch appeared like a mirage, a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley where a creek still ran with enough water to green the cottonwoods. The house was adobe, low and sprawling, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. Outbuildings stood nearby, a barn, corrals, a bunkhouse. It was modest but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful stewardship. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, older than Daniel by perhaps a decade, with the same lean build and sun-weathered skin. "Daniel, what happened?" "Stage got hit by bandits, Tom." "Driver is dead. These folks need help." Daniel dismounted and carefully helped Sarah down, then assisted the merchant. "This is Miss Sarah Greene," and he looked at the merchant questioningly. "Ramirez," the man whispered. "Miguel Ramirez. Mr. Ramirez. Tom here is my foreman and about the best hand in the territory." "Tom, can you see to Mr. Ramirez while I tend to Miss Greene?" Tom nodded, his weathered face kind beneath his hat. "Of course. Come on, sir. Let us get you something to drink and a place to sit down." Daniel led Sarah to the house, his hand light on her elbow. Inside, the rooms were cool and spare, furnished with simple furniture and clean lines. It was the home of a man who lived alone but took pride in his space. He showed her to a chair in the kitchen and began pumping water into a basin. "Let me see your hands," he said, pulling another chair close. When she extended them, palms up, he made a soft sound of sympathy. "That must hurt. Hold still." He cleaned the scrapes with careful efficiency, his touch gentle despite the sting of the water. Sarah watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression, the small furrow between his brows. There was something almost intimate about the moment, this stranger tending to her wounds with such care. "You said you have work in Columbus?" he asked as he worked. "My cousin runs a boarding house there. She said she could use help. I have some experience with cooking and cleaning." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I have no family anymore, no dowry, just myself and my willingness to work." She was not sure why she told him that, this man she had just met. Perhaps it was the shock of the attack, or the way he had saved her life without expecting thanks. Perhaps it was simply that he was being kind to her, and kindness had been in short supply in her life lately. Daniel looked up from her hands, his winter sky eyes meeting hers. "That is more than some people have, Miss Greene. An honest willingness to work is worth more than gold to the right person." He finished with her hands and moved to check the bruise forming on her temple where she had hit the ground. His fingers were feather-light as they probed the swelling, his face very close to hers. Sarah found her breath catching, found herself noticing the flecks of darker blue in his irises, the faint scar on his chin. "I do not think you have a concussion, but you should rest. You can stay here tonight, take one of the spare rooms. In the morning I will drive you into Columbus in my wagon." "I could not impose. It is not an imposition, Miss Greene. It is practicality. The sun will set soon and the roads are not safe, as you have already discovered. Besides, you have had a shock. You need rest and a good meal." He stepped back, giving her space. "I insist." Sarah knew she should protest further, knew that staying overnight at a man's ranch was hardly proper even with Tom as a nominal chaperone. But she was so tired, and the thought of facing Columbus and her cousin's uncertain welcome tonight was more than she could bear. So she nodded, and something like approval flickered in Daniel's eyes. He made dinner, which surprised her. She had expected he would have a housekeeper or perhaps call on Tom to help, but Daniel moved around the kitchen with easy competence, frying steaks and potatoes, setting out bread and butter. When she offered to help, he shook his head. "You are a guest, and you have had a terrible day. Sit and rest." They ate at the kitchen table, Tom and Miguel joining them. The merchant was looking better now, color returning to his face, though he still seemed shaken. Tom told stories about the ranch, clearly trying to lighten the mood, and Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. Daniel said little, but she caught him watching her now and then, his expression thoughtful. After dinner, Tom took Miguel to the bunkhouse for the night. Daniel showed Sarah to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It was simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but the sheets were clean and someone had left a vase of dried wildflowers on the windowsill. "There is water in the pitcher if you need to wash," Daniel said from the doorway. "And I will leave some of my mother's old clothes outside the door. They might fit you well enough since your dress is torn." "Your mother?" Sarah asked. "She passed when I was 19. Fever. My father went 2 years later. It has been just me and Tom running this place since then." He said it matter-of-factly without self-pity, but Sarah heard the old grief beneath the words. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Thank you. Try to get some rest, Miss Greene. Morning will come early." After he left, Sarah sank onto the bed and finally let herself shake. The tears came then, hot and overwhelming, for the driver whose name she had never learned, for her own close brush with death. for the overwhelming strangeness of finding herself in this place with this unexpected man. She cried quietly into the pillow, not wanting to disturb the household, until exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory returned in a rush. She sat up and found a simple cotton dress laid neatly on the chair by the door, pale blue and worn soft with washing. It fit her reasonably well, though she had to tie the sash tighter than intended. When she emerged, Daniel was already up and working. Through the window, she could see him in the corral with Tom, checking over a mare with a patient thoroughness that spoke of genuine concern for the animal. He looked up as if sensing her gaze and raised a hand in greeting. Sarah felt her cheeks warm and told herself it was just the morning heat. She found coffee on the stove and poured herself a cup, then set about making breakfast. It was the least she could do to repay his hospitality. By the time Daniel came inside, she had scrambled eggs and fried bread ready, and he stopped in the doorway looking surprised. "You did not have to do this, Miss Greene. I wanted to. Please sit and eat while it is hot." They ate in companionable silence, the morning light golden through the windows. When they finished, Daniel pushed his plate back and looked at her seriously. "Miss Greene, I need to ask you something. When we get to Columbus, are you certain you have a place to stay? This cousin of yours, is she expecting you definitely?" Sarah hesitated. The truth was she was not certain at all. She wrote that she could use help, but I have not heard from her since I sent word I was coming. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Columbus is a rough town sometimes, growing but rough. If things do not work out with your cousin, I want you to know that my offer of work is genuine. I could use help here at the ranch. Cooking, mending, that sort of thing. The pay would be fair and you would have your own quarters. Tom's wife used to help before she passed last year, and we have been managing as best we can, but it is not easy. Sarah stared at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. "You are offering me employment, but you do not know me. I know you are brave, I know you are resourceful, I know you are not afraid of hard work." He met her eyes steadily. "Sometimes that is enough. Just think about it. No pressure, but if Columbus does not suit, you have another option." She did not know what to say. In her experience, men did not offer women jobs without expecting something else in return, something that had nothing to do with cooking or mending. But there was nothing lascivious in Daniel's manner, only a straightforward kindness that left her off balance. "Thank you," she managed. "I will think about it." They left for Columbus an hour later, Miguel Ramirez traveling with them. The merchant was headed to El Paso but would need to arrange for another stage, and he was effusive in his thanks to Daniel for the rescue. Sarah sat beside Daniel on the wagon bench, watching the landscape roll by. The road followed the creek for a while before cutting east across open desert. The morning was clear and bright, the air already warming toward afternoon heat. Columbus appeared on the horizon gradually, a collection of buildings spread along the railroad line. It was a young town, Sarah knew, barely a decade old, born of the railroad and the cattle trade. The streets were wide and dusty, lined with false front buildings that boasted ambitious names for what were often humble establishments. There was a hotel, a general store, a saloon, a scattering of houses both adobe and clapboard. Daniel drove them to the hotel first, helping Miguel down and seeing that he was settled. Then he turned to Sarah. "Where is your cousin's boarding house?" "Maple Street," she wrote, "near the church." He nodded and guided the wagon through the streets. Maple Street turned out to be a generous name for a lane of dusty houses on the eastern edge of town. The boarding house was a two-story structure that had seen better days, its paint peeling and its shutters hanging crooked. A sign in the window read "Rooms Available." Sarah felt her heart sink but squared her shoulders. She had nowhere else to go after all. This is it. Daniel helped her down and together they approached the door. Sarah knocked and waited. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, thin and sharp-featured, with Sarah's dark hair and a suspicious expression. "Yes, Cousin Margaret, it is Sarah Greene. I wrote to you about coming to work for you." The woman's expression did not warm. "Sarah, you are early. I did not expect you until next week. The stage was attacked yesterday. This gentleman was kind enough to bring me here today." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, tried not to hear the lack of welcome in her cousin's tone. Margaret looked Daniel up and down, her eyes narrowing. "I see. Well, I suppose you should come in. I do not have a room ready for you yet." "I can pay for a room," Sarah said quickly, though the money in her hem was all she had in the world. "We will discuss it. Come in, then." Margaret stepped back grudgingly. She did not invite Daniel inside, and after a moment, Sarah turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister, for everything. I am in your debt." "No debt, Miss Greene." His eyes searched her face, and she thought he could see her anxiety, her growing certainty that this arrangement would not work. "Remember what I said. You have options." Then he was gone, the wagon rattling away down the dusty street, and Sarah was left standing in the dim hallway of her cousin's boarding house with a sinking feeling in her stomach. The next 3 days confirmed her worst fears. Margaret put her to work immediately, scrubbing floors and washing linens, serving meals to the handful of boarders who lived there. The work itself did not bother Sarah, but Margaret's constant criticism did. Nothing was done well enough or fast enough. The room Sarah was given was barely a closet, airless and hot, and the meals were sparse. Margaret made it clear that Sarah was there on sufferance, that any employment was a charity that could be withdrawn at any moment. "You should be grateful I took you in at all," Margaret said on the 3rd night, as Sarah was washing dishes after dinner. "A girl with no family, no prospects. What would you have done otherwise?" Sarah bit her tongue and said nothing. She was coming to realize that Margaret's letter had not been an offer of genuine help, but rather a chance to acquire cheap labor. She thought of Daniel's offer, of the clean, quiet ranch, and the respectful way he had treated her. She thought of Tom's kind, weathered face, and the way Daniel had tended to her scraped palms with such care. On the 4th day, Margaret informed her that she would need to pay for her room and board, and the cost she named would leave Sarah with almost nothing from her wages. When Sarah protested, Margaret threatened to turn her out. "There are plenty of other girls who would be happy to have this position," Margaret said coldly. "If you do not like the terms, you are free to leave." Sarah knew she was being cheated, knew that Margaret was taking advantage of her lack of options. She finished her work that day with a heavy heart, trying to decide what to do. The other boarders were little help. Most were railroad workers or miners, men who looked at her with uncomfortable intensity when Margaret was not watching. Sarah had taken to keeping to her tiny room as much as possible, feeling increasingly trapped. That evening, as she was carrying water upstairs, one of the boarders cornered her in the hallway. He was drunk, his breath sour with whiskey, and his intentions were clear in the way he crowded her against the wall. "Pretty little thing, like you should not be so unfriendly," he said, his hand reaching for her face. Sarah threw the water at him and ran, her heart hammering. She locked herself in her room and pushed the dresser against the door, then sat on the narrow bed with her arms wrapped around her knees, shaking. She could hear the man cursing in the hallway, hear Margaret's voice raised in anger, but whether she was angry at the man or at Sarah, she could not tell. She did not sleep that night. By dawn, she had made her decision. She packed her few belongings, counted the money in her hem, and left the boarding house as the sun was rising. Margaret would be furious, but Sarah did not care. She would take her chances with Daniel Hollister's offer, even if it meant walking 5 miles north out of town in the growing heat. She made it perhaps 2 miles before she heard the wagon coming up behind her. She turned, hand raised to shade her eyes, and felt her heart lift when she recognized Daniel at the reins. He pulled up beside her, his expression concerned. "Miss Greene, what are you doing walking out here alone?" "I am coming to take you up on your offer of employment, Mr. Hollister," Sarah said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "If it still stands." Something flickered in his eyes, relief perhaps, or pleasure. "It stands. Climb up." She did, settling beside him on the bench, and he turned the wagon around without another word. They rode in silence for a few minutes before Daniel spoke. "Things did not work out with your cousin, I take it." "No, she was not what I hoped." Sarah hesitated, then added, "One of her boarders tried to accost me last night. I knew I could not stay." Daniel's hands tightened on the reins, his jaw setting. "Did he hurt you?" "No, I got away, but I knew if I stayed, eventually something worse would happen. You should have sent word. I would have come for you immediately." The quiet protectiveness in his voice made Sarah's throat tighten. "I am here now." "Yes," Daniel said, and when he looked at her, his winter sky eyes were warm. "You are." They returned to the ranch, and Daniel showed Sarah to the small house where Tom's wife had once lived. It was separate from the main house, just a single room with a sleeping area, a small stove and a table, but it was clean and private and hers. Sarah stood in the doorway and felt tears prick her eyes. "It is perfect," she said. "Good. Settle in, and when you are ready, come up to the main house. We will discuss wages and duties and all the practical matters." Daniel tipped his hat to her and left, giving her space to absorb the reality of her new situation. Sarah set down her bag and looked around her new home. It was modest, but it was more than she had had in years. A place of her own, earned through her own labor. She thought of her mother, who had always tried to shield her from the harshness of their poverty, who had wanted better things for her daughter. She hoped her mother would be proud. The work at the ranch fell into a rhythm quickly. Sarah woke before dawn to make breakfast for Daniel and Tom, then spent her mornings cleaning the house, mending clothes, tending the small vegetable garden behind the main house. Afternoons, she spent preparing the evening meal and doing whatever other chores needed doing. It was hard work, but honest, and Daniel was true to his word about fair wages. He paid her every week, and the money was hers with no strings attached. More than that, she felt safe. Daniel treated her with unfailing respect, never entering a room without knocking, never standing too close, never making her feel uncomfortable. Tom was equally courteous, though he was gruff by nature. They were good men, she realized, the sort of men she had begun to think did not exist. She found herself drawn to Daniel in ways that surprised her. He was not much given to conversation, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and measured. He worked hard, up before dawn and often not done until well after dark, but he never complained. She saw the way he treated his animals, with a gentleness that spoke to his character, and the way he dealt fairly with the men who came to buy horses or cattle from him. The ranch was small but successful, she learned. Daniel bred horses primarily, focusing on sturdy, intelligent animals suited to ranch work. He had built the operation from almost nothing after his parents' death, driven by a determination to honor their memory by making something lasting of the land they had loved. "My father came here in '67, Daniel told her one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun paint the mountains purple and gold. He had nothing but a strong back and a willingness to work. He built this ranch from the ground up, him and my mother. When they died, I swore I would not let it fail. You have done them proud, Sarah said softly. I hope so. He was quiet for a moment, then added, It is a lonely life sometimes, though. Tom is good company, but he has his own grief to carry. Since Maria died, he is not the same. I am sorry about that. He seems like a good man, the best. I could not run this place without him. Daniel looked at her, the fading light catching in his eyes. I am glad you are here, Sarah. It feels less lonely now. He had taken to calling her Sarah instead of Miss Greene sometime in the second week, and she had not corrected him. She liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice, like the informal warmth it suggested. She found herself calling him Daniel in return, though not when Tom was around. That still felt too intimate, too presumptuous. As the weeks passed, Sarah settled into her new life with a sense of peace she had not known in years. The desert summer was brutal, the heat rising in shimmering waves from the hard, packed earth, but she learned to work in the early mornings and evenings, to rest during the worst of the afternoon. She learned to read the sky for signs of the rare rain, to appreciate the stark beauty of the landscape. She learned other things, too. She learned that Daniel had a sweet tooth and loved apple pie. She learned that he sang to the horses sometimes, old ballads in a rough but pleasant voice. She learned that he read in the evenings when his work was done, books about ranching and animal husbandry, but also poetry and history. She learned that he was 28, 6 years older than her, and that he had once been engaged to a girl in El Paso who had broken things off when she realized how hard ranch life would be. Her father owned a hotel, Daniel said when Sarah asked about it, months into her time at the ranch. They were sitting on the porch again, their after-dinner ritual. She thought ranching would be romantic, all sunsets and wildflowers. She did not count on the early mornings, the hard work, the isolation. Can't say I blame her for leaving. This life is not for everyone. It suits me, Sarah said without thinking, and then flushed when Daniel looked at her with surprised pleasure. Does it? His voice was soft. Yes, I like the quiet. I like knowing what each day will bring. I like the work. She hesitated, then added, I like the company. Daniel was silent for a long moment, and Sarah wondered if she had said too much, revealed too much. But when he spoke, his voice was warm. I like the company too, Sarah, more than I can say. Something shifted between them after that conversation. It was subtle, a deepening of the comfortable friendship they had developed. Daniel began finding excuses to linger in the kitchen while she cooked, helping her prepare vegetables or rolling out pie dough. She began joining him and Tom in the evening sometimes, sitting in the barn while they worked on tack or discussing plans for the ranch. He taught her to ride, patient and encouraging as she learned to control the gentle mare he had chosen for her. You are a natural, he said one afternoon, watching as she guided the mare through a series of turns. Most people take weeks to develop that kind of seat. Sarah glowed under his praise, feeling more confident than she had in years. She had never been allowed to ride as a child, horses being an expense her family could not afford. Now, atop the mare with the wind in her face and the desert stretching endlessly around her, she felt free in a way she had never experienced. She started riding out with Daniel sometimes when he checked the fences or moved cattle from one pasture to another. Those were some of her favorite times, the two of them riding side by side through the golden afternoon, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, about learning to rope from his father and to cook from his mother, about the year the drought nearly broke them, and the year the rains came so hard the creek flooded. She told him about her own childhood, about her mother's gentleness and her father's weakness, about the brother who had betrayed her trust and left her with nothing. Some men are not worth the name, Daniel said when she told him about her brother's gambling debts. His voice was hard with disapproval. Families should protect each other, not tear each other down. I do not think he meant to hurt me, Sarah said, though she was not sure she believed it. He just thought of himself first. He always did. That is no excuse. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You deserved better, Sarah. You deserve people who see your worth." The words lodged somewhere deep in her chest, warm and precious. She thought about them often in the days that followed, especially when she caught Daniel watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. It was the way he looked at something he valued, something he wanted to protect. She was falling in love with him. She knew it with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her. She loved his quiet strength, his patience, his fundamental decency. She loved the way he cared for his animals and his land. She loved the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the laugh that rumbled up from his chest when she said something that amused him. She loved his hands, scarred and calloused from hard work, but always gentle. She loved the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. But she did not know if he felt the same. He was kind to her, yes, and attentive, but he was a kind man by nature. She was his employee, living on his property, dependent on him for her livelihood. Even if he did have feelings for her, would he act on them? Would he risk the comfortable working relationship they had developed? The question tormented her as autumn arrived, bringing cooler nights and the occasional rainstorm. She found herself watching him when he was not looking, memorizing the line of his profile, the way he moved, the sound of his voice. She found herself lying awake in her little house at night, thinking about him in the main house, wondering if he was thinking about her. The truth came out on a day in late October. Sarah had been at the ranch for nearly 5 months, and the work had changed her. She was stronger now, tanned from the sun, more confident in her abilities. She felt like a different person from the frightened girl who had crawled away from the overturned stage. She was in the kitchen making bread when Daniel came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway just watching her work, and when she looked up, the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough, "I need to talk to you." She set down the dough she was kneading, her heart suddenly hammering. "All right." He crossed the kitchen and stood before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the faint scar on his chin. He reached out and gently brushed a streak of flour from her cheek, his touch sending shivers through her. "I have been trying to find the right words for weeks," he said. "I have been trying to figure out how to say this without presuming too much, without making you uncomfortable, but I cannot stay silent anymore." "Daniel," she began, but he shook his head. "Please, let me say this. Sarah, you have changed everything for me. This ranch, it used to feel like just work, just survival, but since you came, it feels like a home. I look forward to every morning because I know I will see you. I look forward to every evening because we will sit together on the porch. I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you are doing, hoping you are happy here." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am in love with you, Sarah. I have been for months. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You came here for work, for safety, not for a relationship with your employer. But I need you to know how I feel because I cannot keep pretending I do not." Sarah felt tears spill over, but they were tears of joy. "Daniel, I love you too. I have loved you for so long, but I did not think, I did not dare hope." His hands came up to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "You love me." "Yes," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." "Sarah," he breathed. And then he was kissing her, soft and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. It was her first kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed of, tender and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know we should probably wait, but I do not want to wait. I want you to be my wife, Sarah. I want to build a life with you. I want to give you my name, my home, everything I have." Sarah thought about that day months ago, when she had climbed onto this man's wagon with nothing to her name, no dowry, no family worth claiming. She thought about how he had offered her work, respect, safety. Now he was offering her his heart, his future, his name. "I have no dowry," she said, echoing that first conversation. "No family name worth anything." Daniel smiled, that rare, transformative smile that lit up his whole face. "My name is yours if you want it, Sarah. That is all I care about." "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you." He kissed her again, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in the kitchen, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kept his arms around her, holding her close. "We will do this right," he said. "A proper wedding, a proper courtship, even if it is brief. I want everyone to know you chose me, that this is not just convenience or desperation. You are choosing me because you love me, and I am choosing you because I cannot imagine my life without you." "I do choose you," Sarah said, her hands fisted in his shirt. "I choose you, Daniel Hollister, and I will be proud to take your name." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Columbus. Sarah wore a dress that Daniel had insisted on buying for her, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Daniel wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with happiness. Tom stood as witness, tears running unashamedly down his weathered face. A handful of townspeople attended, curious about the quiet rancher and his unexpected bride. When the pastor asked if Sarah took Daniel to be her husband, she said yes in a voice that rang clear and certain. When Daniel slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger, his hands were steady even though she could see the emotion in his eyes. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife and Daniel kissed her, it felt like the culmination of a journey she had not known she was taking, the answer to questions she had not known to ask. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, Tom having arranged for food and even a few decorations. Some of the neighboring ranchers came, along with a few folks from town. Sarah met them all in a happy blur, overwhelmed by the warmth of their congratulations. These were good people, she realized, the kind of community she had always wanted to be part of. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Daniel took her hand and led her away from the party, out toward the creek where the cottonwoods grew thick. They walked in comfortable silence until they were alone, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. "Happy, wife?" Daniel asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible, husband," Sarah replied, loving the way the word felt on her tongue. He kissed her in the fading light, and Sarah felt the last of her old fears, her old hurts, fall away. She was Sarah Hollister now, wife to a good man, mistress of this small ranch, part of something larger than herself. She had a home, a purpose, a future. That night, in the room they would now share, Daniel was gentle and patient with her, mindful of her innocence. He made her first time something beautiful, full of tenderness and quiet passion. Afterward, as she lay in his arms listening to his heartbeat, Sarah thought about how close she had come to never knowing this happiness. If the stage had not been attacked, if Daniel had not been nearby, if she had stayed with Margaret, her life would have been so different. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his hand stroking her hair. "How lucky I am," Sarah said. "How grateful I am that you found me that day." "I am the lucky one," Daniel said. "You could have chosen to stay in Columbus, could have found work somewhere else, but you came back to me. You chose this life, chose me." "I will always choose you," Sarah promised, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The first year of their marriage was an education in happiness. Sarah had not known that love could be so comfortable, so easy. She and Daniel fell into rhythms that felt natural, mornings of shared coffee and quiet conversation, days of work both separate and together, evenings on the porch watching the sun set. They learned each other's habits, preferences, quirks. She learned that he was grumpy before his first coffee, that he worried about the horses more than he would ever admit, that he had terrible nightmares sometimes about the year his parents died. He learned that she hummed when she was cooking, that she loved thunderstorms, that she was afraid of scorpions but would handle spiders without flinching. They learned each other's bodies, too, the intimacy growing richer and deeper as Sarah's initial shyness faded. Daniel was an attentive lover, patient and creative, and Sarah discovered a passionate side of herself she had not known existed. Their bedroom became a sanctuary, a place where they could express with touch and breath what words sometimes failed to convey. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. Sarah took over much of the household management, freeing Daniel to focus on the horses and cattle. She proved to have a knack for keeping accounts, and under her careful management, they began to save money. She also started a larger garden, selling excess produce in Columbus, and began keeping chickens for eggs and meat. The little additions added up, and by the end of that first year, they were more financially secure than Daniel had been in years. "You are a wonder," Daniel told her one night, reviewing the ledger she kept. "I never managed to save like this. I always just broke even." "It is easier with two," Sarah said, "and I like feeling useful, like I am contributing." "You contribute more than you know," Daniel said, pulling her into his lap. "This place is not just a ranch anymore. It is a home, and that is all because of you." As the second year of their marriage began, Sarah started to feel different. She was tired more easily, queasy in the mornings, sensitive to smells that had never bothered her before. It took her a few weeks to recognize the signs, and when she did, she felt a joy so intense it frightened her. She waited until she was certain before telling Daniel. She found him in the barn one evening, checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. He looked up when she entered, and something in her expression made him set down the brush he was holding and come to her immediately. "Sarah, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, taking his hands in hers. "Daniel, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." She watched the news sink in, watched his eyes widen and then brighten with an emotion that looked almost like awe. "A baby? Sarah, are you certain as I can be?" "I have not had my courses in 3 months, and I have all the signs my mother once described to me." Daniel let out a whoop that startled the horses, then picked her up and spun her around just as he had the day she agreed to marry him. "A baby? Sarah, we are going to have a baby." His joy was infectious, and Sarah found herself laughing even as he set her down and immediately began fussing over her, asking if she should be resting, if she needed anything, if she was feeling all right. "I am fine," she assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong. Everything will be fine." But as the months passed and her belly swelled, Daniel's protectiveness only grew. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, hovered over her like a mother hen. It was sweet and occasionally maddening, but Sarah endured it with good humor because she knew it came from love. Tom was delighted by the news, his gruff exterior cracking to reveal genuine happiness. "About time this place had a child in it again," he said. "It will be good to hear laughter here." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah had bouts of terrible nausea in the first months, and as she grew larger, she struggled with the heat and the aches that came with carrying extra weight. But she was happy, gloriously so, spending her evenings with Daniel's hand on her belly feeling the baby kick, planning for the future. They prepared the small room next to theirs as a nursery, Daniel building a cradle with his own hands. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with love for the child she had not yet met. She felt complete in a way she never had before, as if all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. The baby came on a hot August night in their second year of marriage. Sarah's labor began in the afternoon, and Daniel immediately sent Tom for the midwife in Columbus. She arrived hours later, a competent woman named Mrs. Chen who took charge of the situation with brisk efficiency. Daniel was frantic, pacing outside the bedroom door until Mrs. Chen took pity on him and let him in to hold Sarah's hand. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Sarah thought she could not bear it. But Daniel was there through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally came in the early hours of the morning, a lusty boy with dark hair and strong lungs, Sarah wept with relief and joy. "A son," Mrs. Chen said, placing the baby in Sarah's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Daniel stared at his son with an expression of wonder, his eyes bright with tears. He reached out a tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny hand, and when the little fingers wrapped around his, he let out a choked laugh. "He is perfect," Daniel said. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Sarah asked, exhausted but exhilarated, cradling the warm weight of her child. They had discussed names endlessly over the past months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Daniel said, "Samuel, for my father." "Samuel Thomas Hollister, if you approve." "Samuel Thomas," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world, little one." Motherhood transformed Sarah in ways she had not anticipated. She had always been capable and competent, but now she discovered reserves of strength and patience she had not known she possessed. Samuel was a demanding baby, waking often to nurse, crying lustily when he was uncomfortable. Sarah spent her days in a haze of feeding and changing and soothing, learning to read her son's different cries, to anticipate his needs. Daniel was a devoted father, helping whenever he could, walking the floor with Samuel when the baby was fussy, changing diapers with a matter-of-fact competence that made Sarah love him even more. At night, when the baby would wake crying, Daniel would often get up with her, sitting beside her while she nursed, his hand on her shoulder, his presence a comfort in the darkness. "I never knew I could love someone so much so quickly," Daniel said one night, watching Samuel nurse. "It terrifies me how much I love him, how much I have to lose." "We will not lose him," Sarah said firmly. "He is healthy and strong, and we will protect him. He is going to grow up here on this ranch, happy and loved, and he will know he is wanted." As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch seemed to come even more fully alive. His laughter rang through the house and barn, and he toddled after Daniel whenever he could, mimicking his father's walk, trying to help with chores. He was fearless and curious, constantly getting into things he should not, and Sarah spent her days alternating between exasperation and delight. Tom was wonderful with Samuel, patient and kind, teaching him about the horses and letting him help with small tasks. "He has his father's way with animals," Tom observed one day, watching 3-year-old Samuel carefully brush a patient mare under supervision. "That is a gift." When Samuel was 4, Sarah realized she was pregnant again. This time, she knew the signs immediately, and she told Daniel as soon as she was certain. His reaction was just as joyful as before, though tinged now with the knowledge of what she would go through. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, his hand on her still flat belly. I know how hard the first time was for you." "I am thrilled," Sarah assured him. "I always wanted more than one child. I hated being alone as a child. I want Samuel to have siblings." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Sarah knew what to expect. She was still sick in the early months, still uncomfortable as she grew larger, but she managed better, pacing herself, accepting help when offered. Samuel was fascinated by the changes in his mother's body, pressing his small hands to her belly to feel the baby kick. "Baby," he would say with wonder. "My baby." "Your little brother or sister," Sarah would correct gently, and Samuel would nod seriously. The baby came in April, earlier and faster than Samuel's birth. Daniel barely had time to send for Mrs. Chen before Sarah was pushing, her body remembering what to do. This time, it was a girl, smaller than Samuel had been but just as healthy, with wispy blonde hair and her father's blue eyes. "A daughter," Daniel breathed, holding her with the same awestruck care he had shown Samuel. "We have a daughter, Sarah." They named her Lily Margaret Hollister, Margaret for Sarah's mother, whose memory Sarah still cherished. Lily was a calmer baby than Samuel had been, content to be held and watch the world with solemn eyes. Samuel was entranced with his little sister, constantly wanting to hold her, to help feed her, to show her his treasures. The years that followed were busy and full. Sarah's days were consumed with caring for two young children, managing the household, helping with the ranch work when she could. Daniel worked harder than ever, expanding the operation, buying more land, improving the bloodlines of his horses. Money was still sometimes tight, but they were making it, building something lasting. Samuel started school when he turned 6, riding into Columbus with Daniel 3 days a week to attend the small schoolhouse there. He was bright and eager to learn, bringing home stories of his classmates and his lessons. Lily was a quieter child, content to stay close to home, helping Sarah in the garden or playing with her dolls. When Samuel was 8 and Lily was 4, Sarah found herself pregnant a third time. This pregnancy was harder, perhaps because she was older now, 31 and feeling it. She was exhausted constantly, her back aching, her feet swollen. Daniel worried over her, and even Samuel and Lily seemed to sense that their mother needed extra care, being unusually well behaved. "I am fine," Sarah kept insisting, but she was secretly relieved when the baby came a few weeks early, another son they named James Daniel Hollister. James was tiny but fierce, making his presence known from the first moment with powerful lungs and an iron will. With 3 children, the house was chaotic and loud and wonderful. Sarah had never imagined she would have this life, this family. Some mornings she would wake before everyone else and lie in bed listening to the sounds of the house. Daniel's soft breathing beside her, the children stirring in their rooms, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. The ranch continued to prosper. Daniel's reputation as a breeder of quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far away as Texas and Arizona to purchase his stock. He hired additional help, 2 young cowboys named Pete and John, who took some of the burden off Tom, who was aging now, his movements slower, his face more lined. But Tom would not hear of retiring, insisting he would work until he dropped. "This ranch is my life," he told Daniel. "I have nowhere else I would rather be." Sarah understood that. The ranch was her life too, in ways she could not have imagined that day she had climbed onto Daniel's wagon with nothing to her name. She had found more than employment here. She had found home, family, purpose, love. As the children grew, Sarah made sure they understood how lucky they were, how blessed. She told them stories of her own childhood, of her mother's struggles, of the importance of hard work and integrity. She taught them to value what they had, to treat others with kindness, to never take their blessings for granted. Daniel taught them, too, in his own way. He taught them about the land, about animals, about the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. He taught them that a person's word was their bond, that reputation mattered, that you protected what was yours and respected what belonged to others. Samuel grew into a serious boy with his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. He loved the ranch, loved the horses especially, and it was clear he would follow in Daniel's footsteps. Lily was gentler, more artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals, singing to herself as she worked. James was the wild one, fearless and impulsive, constantly getting into scrapes that left Sarah torn between exasperation and laughter. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and chores, of birthdays and holidays, of small triumphs and occasional setbacks. There were hard years when the rain did not come, and they had to sell off stock to survive. There were good years when the calves were strong and the foals brought high prices. Through it all, Sarah and Daniel held fast to each other and to the life they had built. When Samuel turned 16, he announced that he wanted to stay on the ranch full-time rather than continue his schooling. Daniel and Sarah discussed it at length, ultimately deciding to let him make his own choice. Samuel was a capable hand, worth 2 men, and his passion for the work was evident. He would learn more from practical experience than from books, they reasoned, and the ranch would benefit from his dedication. Lily, at 12, was showing signs of wanting something different. She talked about becoming a teacher, about seeing more of the world beyond their valley. Sarah encouraged her, knowing her daughter needed the freedom to find her own path. James, at 8, was still young enough that his future was uncertain, but Sarah suspected he might end up leaving the ranch eventually. He had a restless spirit that reminded her of her own brother, though without the weakness that had been her brother's downfall. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Daniel took Sarah riding out to the spot by the creek where he had proposed. They had left the children with Tom for the afternoon, wanting time alone together. As they dismounted and walked hand in hand through the cottonwoods, Sarah reflected on how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "This life, me. Sometimes I think about what you might have had if you had gone somewhere else, done something different." Sarah turned to face him, putting her hands on either side of his face. He was 43 now, silver threading through his dark hair, new lines around his eyes and mouth, but to her he was more handsome than ever. "I have never regretted a single moment," she said fiercely. "Daniel, you gave me everything I never knew I needed. You gave me a home, a family, a name I am proud to carry. You gave me love and respect and partnership. How could I ever regret that?" "I am the one who got lucky," Daniel said, pulling her close. "That day I found you by the overturned stage, I thought I was just helping someone in need. I had no idea I was meeting the woman who would change my entire life." They stood there in the dappled shade, holding each other, thinking about the journey they had taken together. From that first desperate day to this moment of perfect contentment, they had built something real and lasting. "I love you, Sarah Hollister," Daniel said. "I have loved you since the day you walked back to the ranch after leaving your cousin's place, since the moment I saw you standing on that road with your chin up and your back straight, ready to face whatever came next. You are the bravest, strongest woman I have ever known, and I thank God every day that you chose me." "I love you," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I will always choose you, Daniel, always." He kissed her there under the cottonwoods, and Sarah felt the same rush of joy and rightness she had felt on their wedding day, on the day each of their children was born, on 1,000 ordinary days in between. This was her life, this man and this land and the family they had created together. She had no regrets, only gratitude. As they rode back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light, Sarah thought about the girl she had been, frightened and alone with no dowry and no family name. That girl could never have imagined this future, this richness of life and love. But she had been brave enough to accept help when it was offered, brave enough to take a chance on a quiet cowboy with kind eyes, brave enough to claim the name he had offered. The ranch appeared before them, the house and barn and outbuildings solid and real, smoke rising from the chimney where Tom was no doubt making dinner for the children. As they dismounted, Samuel came running from the barn, James close behind him, both boys eager to tell their parents about something that had happened with one of the mares. Lily appeared in the doorway, waving, her blonde hair bright in the sun. This was Sarah's family, her home, her life. She had started with nothing and had been given everything. Daniel took her hand as they walked toward the house, and Sarah squeezed his fingers. 15 years, 3 children, countless challenges overcome. They had built this together, day by day, choice by choice. "Happy anniversary, wife," Daniel said softly. "Happy anniversary, husband," Sarah replied, and meant it with her whole heart. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both large and small. Samuel grew into a man, tall and strong like his father, with the same steady presence that inspired trust in both animals and people. At 20, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Emma who loved ranch life as much as he did. Their wedding was a joyous affair, held at the ranch with half the county in attendance. Sarah watched her firstborn say his vows and felt the bittersweet pang of a mother seeing her child become independent, mingled with pride at the fine man he had become. Samuel and Emma built a house on the far side of the property, and Samuel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Daniel began to slow down. It was not that Daniel was old, only 50 now, but the years of hard work had taken their toll. His back troubled him sometimes, and he no longer had the endless energy of his youth. He was content to let Samuel take the lead, to become more of an advisor than the primary operator. "It is good to see the ranch in capable hands," Daniel told Sarah one evening. "Samuel has the same love for this land that my father had, that I have. It will be in good hands when we are gone." "We are not gone yet," Sarah said firmly. She was 43, still strong and healthy, though she had to admit the years were showing on her too. Her dark hair was threaded with silver, and she moved more carefully than she once had. But she was happy, deeply and completely happy. Lily, at 18, surprised no one by announcing she wanted to attend normal school and become a teacher. She had been accepted to a school in Santa Fe, and though Sarah's heart ached at the thought of her daughter leaving, she was proud too. Lily would make an excellent teacher, patient and kind and intelligent. "Come home whenever you can," Sarah told her daughter the day they put her on the stage to Santa Fe. "This will always be your home, no matter where life takes you." "I know, Mother," Lily said, hugging her tightly. "Thank you for letting me go. Thank you for understanding that I need to find my own way." James, at 14, was still finding himself. He helped on the ranch when needed, attended school when his mother insisted, and spent as much time as possible exploring the desert and mountains. He had a restless spirit that worried Sarah sometimes, but Daniel was more sanguine. "Let him be young," Daniel said. "He will figure out what he wants eventually. Not everyone is meant to be a rancher." Tom passed away in his sleep at the age of 78, 5 months after Lily left for school. They found him in his bed in the bunkhouse, peaceful and still, as if he had simply decided it was time to go. Sarah and Daniel grieved deeply, as did Samuel and the other hands who had known and respected him. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marker that read, "Thomas Garrett, friend and partner." "He was family," Daniel said at the graveside service. "He was here when I had nothing, and he stayed through everything. This ranch would not exist without him." Sarah thought about all the people who had shaped their lives, the ones who had helped and hindered, the ones they had lost, and the ones who remained. Life was a tapestry of connections, she realized, woven together in ways you could not always see while you were living it. Samuel and Emma gave them their first grandchild that winter, a boy they named Daniel Thomas after his grandfather and great-uncle. Holding the baby for the first time, Sarah felt the circle complete. She was a grandmother now, watching her son begin the journey she and Daniel had taken so many years ago. "He is beautiful," Sarah whispered, cradling the baby close. "You are going to be wonderful parents." "We learned from the best," Samuel said, his arm around Emma. "You and Dad showed us what a good marriage and a good family look like." Sarah blinked back tears, thinking about that day 20 years ago when she had stood by an overturned stage with nothing to her name. She had built this with Daniel, with determination and love and faith. She had created a legacy that would outlive her, children and grandchildren who would carry forward the values she and Daniel had tried to instill. Lily came home for summers and holidays, full of stories about her studies and her students. She had taken a position in a small town north of Santa Fe, teaching children of farmers and ranchers, and she glowed with the satisfaction of work she loved. At 21, she met a young lawyer named Thomas Wells, and they courted in a whirlwind that reminded Sarah of her own love story. They married in the church in Columbus, Lily radiant in white, Thomas solid and serious and clearly devoted to her. "Another good man," Daniel said, watching them dance at their wedding reception. "We did well with our children, Sarah. They all chose well." James, at 17, announced he wanted to join the army. Sarah's heart sank, but she knew better than to try to talk him out of it. He was so like her brother in his restlessness, but unlike her brother, he had a core of integrity and discipline that would serve him well. They saw him off at the train station, Sarah's eyes dry though her heart was breaking. "Be safe," she told him, holding him tight. "Write to us. Come home when you can." "I will, Mother, I promise. I just need to see more of the world to figure out who I am away from the ranch." Sarah understood that. She had left everything she knew once, looking for a place where she belonged. James needed to do the same, and she had to trust that he would find his way home eventually. With the children grown and gone, Sarah and Daniel found themselves alone together in a way they had not been in decades. It was strange at first, the quiet house, the lack of voices and footsteps. But they adjusted, rediscovering the rhythms of their early marriage, the comfortable companionship that had always been at the heart of their relationship. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, when Daniel said, "Do you remember what I said to you, that first time we talked after I brought you here? When you told me you had no dowry, no family name?" "You said your name was mine if I wanted it," Sarah said, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "I meant it," Daniel said. "I still mean it. Everything I have, everything I am is yours, Sarah. You made my life worth living. You turned this place from a ranch into a home. You gave me children and grandchildren, love and partnership and joy. I cannot imagine what my life would have been without you." Sarah reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You saved me, Daniel, not just from those bandits that day, but from a life of loneliness and fear. You gave me the courage to be strong, to build something, to believe I was worth something. I love you more now than I did the day we married, if that is even possible." "It is possible," Daniel said, "because I feel the same way." They sat in the gathering dusk, hands linked, hearts full. Sarah thought about the years ahead, about growing old with this man she loved, about watching their grandchildren grow, about the legacy they had built together. She thought about the girl with no dowry and no family name, and the cowboy who had offered her everything. She had taken his name with pride, and she had made it her own. She was Sarah Hollister, wife and mother and grandmother, partner in a life well lived. And she was content. More grandchildren came in the years that followed. Samuel and Emma had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Lily and Thomas had twins, a boy and a girl who visited the ranch every summer. Even James, when he returned from his service at 23, married a girl he had met in Arizona and began building a life there, though he brought his family home to visit regularly. The ranch became a gathering place, full of laughter and children and the evidence of a life well lived. Sarah, at 55, was slowing down but still active, still engaged with the world. She taught her granddaughters to cook and garden, told them stories about her life, passed down the lessons she had learned. She watched Daniel with the grandchildren and saw him transform, his serious face softening, his rare laughter coming more easily. On their 35th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting everyone they knew. The ranch was packed with people, neighbors and friends, business associates and family. Sarah stood beside Daniel, receiving congratulations and well wishes, and felt overwhelmed by the richness of her life. 35 years, someone said. That is quite an accomplishment. It has not always been easy, Sarah admitted, but it has always been worth it. We built this together, Daniel and I, from nothing, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Late that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Sarah and Daniel walked out to the creek one last time. They were older now, moving more slowly, but their hands were still linked, their hearts still bound together. "Thank you," Daniel said simply, "for saying yes, for taking my name, for building this life with me." "Thank you for offering," Sarah replied, "for seeing something in me worth saving, for giving me a place to belong." They stood beneath the cottonwoods, the same trees that had witnessed their proposal so many years ago, and Sarah felt the weight of all those years, all those moments, all those choices. She had built something lasting, something real. She had taken one man's offer of his name and had created a family, a legacy, a life that mattered. Daniel was 63 now, his hair silver, his movements careful, but his eyes were still that same winter sky blue, still full of love when he looked at her. Sarah was 55, her dark hair almost entirely gray, her face lined with years of sun and work and laughter. They were not the young people who had met beside an overturned stage so long ago, but they were still themselves, still together, still in love. "I would not change a thing," Sarah said softly. "Not a single moment." "Neither would I," Daniel agreed. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Hollister. And you to me, Daniel Hollister." They walked back to the house hand in hand, moving slowly but steadily, 2 people who had started with nothing and had built everything. The house was dark and quiet, the ranch peaceful under the stars. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, the hands Samuel had hired were settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more joys. But tonight, Sarah and Daniel had each other, and that was all they had ever needed. Sarah thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and alone with no dowry and no family name. She thought about the cowboy who had said, "My name is yours if you want it," and how those simple words had changed everything. She had wanted it. She had taken his name and had made it her own, had honored it with her choices, her work, her love. She was Sarah Hollister, and she had no regrets. Only gratitude for the life she had been given, the love she had found, the family she had created. She had started with nothing and had ended with everything that mattered. And when she finally fell asleep that night, Daniel's arm around her waist, his breath warm against her neck, she dreamed of cottonwoods and creek water, of children's laughter and horses running free, of a life lived fully and well, of a love that had endured through everything and would endure still. The morning sunlight would wake them early as it always did, and they would rise to face another day together. But for now, in the quiet darkness, they rested in the comfort of all they had built, all they had shared, all they had become. Two people who had found each other in the wilderness and had created something beautiful, something lasting, something true, a family, a home, a legacy of love. And Sarah knew with a certainty that went bone deep that the young woman she had been would be proud of the woman she had become. Proud of the choices she had made, proud of the name she had taken, proud of the life she had built with nothing but courage and love and the willingness to say yes when opportunity came calling in the form of a cowboy with winter sky eyes and a generous heart. She was Sarah Hollister, and she had lived a life worth living. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was more than enough.